We're underway on our studies of infectious disease, and this little graphic really speaks to us because we're covered with pathogens. We have pathogens that circulate through our body and may not manifest themselves at all, but we know that our skin envelope is covered by virus and bacteria, fungus, and we need to be alert to that. If we fell and create an abrasion on our hand, those pathogens get injected to tissues that are below the skin and can cause infection. So here we are, we're underway in our study. Not necessarily logical, but on my mind are some of the parasites to which we're vulnerable. This is a particular case of flea bites. Obviously, the parasite is seeking a food source in your blood, and then this poor little guy has the larva of a worm known as the zoonosis, and this worm can move several millimeters up to several centimeters a day, and it's uncomfortable. It gets in between the layers of skin, and it's in its larval state. And so the treatment of that is self-limiting, meaning that you just have to live it out. You just have to make it happen. Otherwise, not so interested in dissecting and removing that parasite. And then here are some parasites about which you may know or not. This is a fungal infection. Onychomycosis. It is a subungual fungus that Tinactin, a spray-on is not going to get to that. You'll have to have an oral internal antifungal medication. This is a case of Ebola. These are the parts in the world where this particular parasite is prevalent. Here are some of the symptoms of this. This is a person who did hot tubbing and the parasite bored underneath the skin. Doesn't sound very pleasing, but parasites would love to use our bodies for host, and there's a whole raft of these. Very often, in this particular case, the zoonosis bores into the foot if you walk on sand or dirt in which the larvae are present. So anyway, being aware of regional threats. And then classification of microscopic parasites would include the necessity for us to study bacteria, virus, protozoa, single cell, and fungi in various forms. And so we're going to spend some time working on that. Pathogenicity, how does the pathogen get talked about, or what's the language of this? The principal pathogen is what is initially the disease that encounters our defense mechanism, so principal pathogens. Opportunistic pathogen is a disease that finds a foothold in an organism that's already compromised, immunocompromised, and so in persons like infants, the elderly, pregnant women, people with HIV/AIDS, they're not able to throw off another onslaught of disease pathogens, disease-bearing pathogens, I guess we'd say. And so an opportunistic disease is one that hits. So in HIV/AIDS, there's certain kinds of pneumonias that attack and can be what ultimately is the cause of death in a person who has that. Virulent pathogens. The word virulence has some meaning for me. As a matter of fact, I went to the medical dictionary, and because it has different meanings. If the context is a medical context, then the definition is the relative power and degree of pathogenicity possessed by the organism. So a really robust, hardy pathogen is resistant to the counterattack by our immune system. So depending upon the potency of the disease and the production of the outcome, severe disease and death may result more likely from a virulent infection. And then transmission can be through these modes. I'll let you read this and consume this in the PowerPoint presentation. I don't need to read it to you, but there are some diseases that are represented from the various means of transmission. I'm particularly intrigued. There's a difference between airborne and droplet. In an airborne disease, these are childhood diseases, but also tuberculosis. We'll study that more in depth and be utilizing that in class. A droplet will be where actually liquid that is projected from the nose or the mouth, containing the antigen, lands on someone, gets on them, is inhaled by them. That's different than airborne. Okay? And then the progression of the transmission. It's mentioned to you in class that there are some diseases, quite a number of diseases, where symptoms won't occur until, let's start again. The symptoms may not be manifested in the host before they're actually infected. Boy, I messed that up. Symptoms may not manifest prior to them being communicable, sending the disease, sloughing off the disease. And so see if this makes sense to you. Read this, and I think you'll understand what I flubbed up there a little bit. Okay, signs and symptoms of infection include all of these things. The body's trying to fight off the infection by causing our temperature to come up. Heat is a defense mechanism. In our culture, we tend to want to get that temperature down, and sometimes that's counterproductive because the temperature is designed to fight the infection. We don't want the temperature to get so high that the proteins of our vital organs denature, because that can lead to necrosis. Chills are a means to get the temperature up. Sweating to cool us down. Malaise, just feel crummy, just feel lousy. Nausea, vomiting. Altered mentation, particularly in the elderly. They have less capacity to respond with fever, and the first indication that they have an infection may be that they're not thinking or talking or moving effectively, efficiently. And then the signs and symptoms will be sometimes specific to the organ system that's involved. I mentioned in class about the magic line of 102 degrees. You can see here that the pathologies that will never have a temperature that's above 102. Atelectasis, which is a collapsed lung, myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack where a blood clot, a thrombosis, is occluding a coronary artery, and oxygenated blood doesn't get to a portion of the heart, and that heart muscle dies in that location. Mononucleosis, pulmonary emboli, which is another blood clot. And then, and you see here, I'm making the case about the elderly. They may not have anything above a normal temperature and be manifesting these. And then those conditions above 102 where very high temperatures can result, obviously hyperthermia, where a person gets overheated. This is an issue for people who are quadriplegics or paraplegics. They have a sympathetic arousal, and their temperature will skyrocket, and this can lead to brain injury. Urosepsis, where a person has bladder or kidney infection, HIV, and lymphoma, which is cancer of the lymphatic tissues. Defense against infection, the number one is our skin barrier. Regardless, abrasion, incision, laceration, puncture, all of these make the organism vulnerable to an infestation or an injection of pathogens into the body. Skin is the largest organ system. We're going to study that in depth. All of these things that are listed, gag reflex, peristalsis, flushing of tears, saliva, and mucus, are designed to expel that which could be a threat to the organism. Second line of defense is inflammation. And inflammation walls off the disease pathogen, neutralizes it, and hopefully destroys it if our immune system is intact. And then third line of defense is the immune response. So inflammation and immune response are, once the antigen is introduced, then those are the next lines of defense. I think you're aware that there's great concern at the Center of Disease Control and the World Health Organization about the cavalier approach to, or the too liberal approach to the use of antibiotics, because bacteria can mutate and become resistant to this. Back in the day when there were no antibiotics, lifespan was short. The average lifespan was way shorter than it is now. We can throw off bacteria that used to take lives. So, and then I wanted to talk to you about several different types of bacteria. C. diff is transmitted through oral fecal transmission, where there's fecal material in the water, or somebody's not washing their hands or whatever, and the bacteria can be transmitted in that way. And the primary sign and symptom is diarrhea, and a very common place where this occurs is in the hospital. So you see here under setting, this is called nosocomial. Iatrogenic is an infection that occurs during medical treatment. If it's nosocomial, it happened in the hospital. And then Staphylococcus aureus. We're completely covered by Staphylococcus aureus, and this is a primary reason for infection when the skin envelope is broken. Okay, I'm going to stop this this video and pick up again. Okay, bye-bye.